Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the last session of the day. My name is Rodney Medina. I'm an AppV MVP. As you might have noticed, almost the whole AppV MVP team is present this week in BriForum, so that's pretty cool. I don't see any one of them here now, so I guess I'm all alone for all the difficult questions. I'm going to talk about AppV and the user state virtualization and how they work together. And as you might know, the AppV 5 beta came out, I think it was last month. So when we did our submissions for the BriForum, we didn't know we were allowed to speak about AppV 5. So since we did, I decided to change a large portion of the presentation. So I will start with AppV 4.6 and user state virtualization and how they work together. And then I will go into AppV 5 changes. So I think everyone, all the other AppV sessions have touched a bit on specific areas. And I want to give a high-level overview of all the changes. So sequencer, client, server-side, how dynamic composition, suite composition works now. So all those aspects around that. So I wasn't able to get TechTarget to change the session name on that. So it's going to be a little bit more. Hopefully you will enjoy that. A bit more about me. I'm the owner and contributor of softwareblog.com, which I should change, I know. But everyone that has been working with AppV up until now, even the registry keys, values, folder names are still called SoftGrid, so I kept the name. I actually have been working with SoftGrid 2.0. So I'm quite happy to see where we are these days, especially with the AppV 5 release coming out later, maybe this year. Did a lot of consulting in the beginning, also the first implementation, so when application virtualization was really new. First versions of SoftGrid actually had some specific hard-coded fixes in it to get offers to work and stuff like that, so it's a lot more general now. I did a lot of trainings, created an own masterclass that was given around the world, but I think the only masterclass now really given is by Tim Mangan. The rest is really the basic MDOP training you all might know probably. And I currently work at Medio, where we productize a profile management solution called Medio Flex Profiles. So the agenda for now is AppV 4. Not AppV 4 in general, but very specific how personalization is handled by AppV itself. Some considerations about native user state virtualization, especially if you combine it with AppV, there's some considerations with the SoftGrid client folder, redirection or not, offline files, stuff like that. Some of the limitations very shortly, and then I'll dive into AppV 5 in a general level. And the nice thing is, which is quite important for you guys probably to already start preparing, is the way personalization is handled in AppV 5, because that's completely different. So especially from a migration scenario, if you work with AppV 4 now and you're going to upgrade to AppV 5, besides the packages, there's some real things you need to prepare yourself for if you're going to move up to AppV 5. So I'll dig into that specifically as well. I don't think we have enough time to dive into Microsoft user experience virtualization. Just a short overview, maybe some questions you have. We can touch on that as well. And I would like to keep it interactive, so just interrupt me during the presentation if you have some specific questions. Also during the demos, maybe I can show you something live if you have a specific question. So one of the most important things, again, everyone has his own representation of this, but I think this is a very important aspect. One of the nice things of application virtualization, it's a decoupling mechanism. So you can decouple the application installation from the underlying operating system, which makes the management of the desktop much more dynamic. Meaning the more applications you virtualize with AppV, the easier it is to replace the underlying operating system. So as soon as a lot of us have been sequencing a lot of applications for Windows XP, and we all know that a large majority of those applications work directly on Windows 7. And probably a lot of them will work on Windows 8 as well. Because I think on an application level, the difference is bigger between Windows XP and Windows 7 than Windows 7 and Windows 8. So everything on that level seems to be safe for us, and the pain of the sequences will not happen again, hopefully. But the next thing, of course, is that you can also take a step to decouple the user state. And this is what Microsoft calls user state virtualization. So I'm sticking to the Microsoft terminology because all the other vendors have a different terminology of this aspect, of course. So that's really a rough breakdown on how to build a dynamic desktop environment and how application virtualization really can play a role in that. Because most of us all know, if you sequence something on Windows XP, it probably works on Windows 2003 terminal services as well. And this is what SoftGrid has brought us from the beginning, that application installation and all the difficulty of getting an application to work on specific operating systems is simply decoupled. And that's why you can switch between all those different environments while only packaging the application once. Maybe some of you are still doing it, but way in the past, before AppV was used, we always need to package each application twice. One for terminal server and one for the desktop environment. And mostly done by different groups of people as well with different specialties. So the nice thing of AppV is that we decouple the application installation. So that's really a benefit. We all know that. One of the important aspects of AppV itself as well is that the changes you make as a user are also decoupled from the AppV application. So it's not that if you have a virtual application running on a client device and you make a change, that you're making a change to the package. I mean, all those changes are stored in the PKG files. So everyone knows about PKG files, maybe also from some issues, but that's totally separated. So you can compare that a little bit with a snapshot from a virtual machine. So if I stream the application to the local client, launch the application, as a user I make some changes. If I mess up the changes in the application, the only thing I have to do is delete that specific PKG file for that specific user, specific application, and you get the defaults back. So that's also a very nice thing to provide support instead of throwing away the whole user profile, which we do with natively installed applications a lot, of course. So all the changes you make as a user to an application are stored in those PKG files, which is a proprietary format. That's why we're losing them in AppV5, because it needs to be more open as a format, of course. And those are changes that you typically would make within an application as a user. The nice thing with the virtualization is that you as a user can even make changes to an application that are changed on a system level. So that's again why in the beginning the AppV technology was very early adopted by primarily server-based computing people, because making a change to an application in the local machine registry or an INI file in C, Windows, that's really an issue in a terminal server. The nice thing is those changes are also encapsulated into that personal PKG file. So for people working with terminal server, this will create a multi-user experience out of the box. You don't have to do anything special, just use AppV for that. So where are those PKG files stored? Well, they're stored per default. I will go into the different options you have a bit later, but per default they are stored in the roaming application data folder as a SoftGrid client folder as mentioned before. So for each application you launch, a specific folder will be created, and that is a part of the package root name you sequence the application to per default on Q, plus the package GUID. So that's a combination you see. So I know some people that do randomization of the package root folders to make sure that within AppV you cannot get any conflicts. The only downside of that is that it's harder to figure out where the personal settings of a specific application is stored. So that's why I still like using an 8.3 format when sequencing something to Q, because providing support then is just a matter of finding the folder in the app data folder of the user. So I can see this is Acrobat Reader. I only have to delete that to revert to the default state of the personalization for that specific application. So in each folder you will find a PKG file. They all have the same name. So that's not application specific. This is just a hard-coded name that SoftGrid or AppV uses to store the personal settings. One of the things you really need to keep in mind, especially when you're talking about roaming users, is that those PKG files tend to grow quite big. Has anyone seen the PKG files grow enormously while you think you have a simple application? So this is an example of what is it? I think it's Acrobat Reader. So this is only launching and closing Acrobat Reader. And the personal settings are already around 500 kilobytes. So that simply has to do with the whole way the PKG file actually works. Does anyone have an idea why the PKG files tend to grow so big? Because I can tell you, if I would use a profile management solution to store the personal settings of Acrobat Reader, it would only be around 40 kilobytes. So the file is 500 kilobytes. So what happens in SoftGrid, and it has been since the beginning, and we will lose that in the next version of AppV, is that AppV simply, when you launch an application, sees how an executable that a user launches is opening files that it uses. And the developer of the application actually influences the size of the PKG file. So we have no influence. That's what it comes down to. So what a lot of the Adobe products do is when they open DLLs, from a programmatic point of view, they open DLLs with a read-write command, while there will never be something written there. So the way AppV works now is they look how an application is opening other files it uses. And as soon as they see a read-write command to a file, to open it, open with read-write, they will give the user a personal copy. Because SoftGrid thinks personal changes will be stored in that specific file. So if you use Kalle Sanomaki's tool, which can actually show you the internals of a PKG file, you will sometimes see files in there that you're like, that's an installation component. Why is it in the personal space of the user? So that's the reason why the PKG files tend to grow big. So when are they actually used? And where are they actually stored when you're using the application? Because I think all of us are aware of the fact that the SoftGrid client folder in the app data folder, that's where they are important. But when you launch the application, actually a copy is made of that PKG file to app data local, or local app data. And then the name of the file is actually the same. It's the same folder structure. It only has a .temp extension instead of PKG. So when you launch Acrobat Reader, a copy is made from roaming app data to local app data, and that file is actually being used during the application. So when you launch an application, you can actually delete the PKG file when it's launched, and you won't lose any settings because it's not being used. The temp file is being used. The temp file is also undeletable while the application is running. So let me switch to a AppV 4.6 client. Open up app data. I didn't launch any application yet, so that's why you only see the icon cache. Let me also open local app data. Actually, the SoftGrid client folder is not even created there yet. That will happen on first launch of the first application. So I have Nero Burning ROM running here. I think it's an old version, so I will get a compatibility message, but that's not an issue. So if I now look in the SoftGrid client folder, the roaming part, I see the Nero 6 and the package GUID folder created. And there's no PKG file there yet, but the personal settings are already stored. Actually, the first time you launch an application, you already have personal settings. And you will find those in the local app data folder. So these are the personal settings. So if I make a slight modification, like setting it a bit bigger and getting rid of the file tab right here. If I close the application, this temp file is actually copied here. This temp file is not cleaned up until you log off, but you can easily delete it when the application is not running. So when I launch the application for the second time, the personal settings are simply loaded from, or the PKG file is copied locally, and the temp file is actually being used actively by the SoftGrid client. Any idea why they're using local app data for this? It wasn't the case until AppV 4.5, I believe, but I'm not sure actually. Any idea why? That's one aspect, yeah. Because app data can be redirected over the network, and then the file, or all the files for all the applications you have running are open. So imagine a terminal server scenario where you have lots of open files then to the network. So that's one. Any other reason? What if app data is redirected and I disconnect from the network while my applications are open? Then the PKG file is just lost, and you will lose all personal settings. So that's why they're using it local each time, just to make sure that if you have a bad network or you walk around the office with a Wi-Fi connection, that the application will remain its settings. So this temp file I cannot delete because the application is open. And well, the personal settings were stored, as you can see. And it's very simple. If I just delete this folder or this PKG file, and I launch the application is reset to the defaults. So providing support is quite easy. One of the nice things actually in the app v5 client, as a technical person, I don't know if users will understand it, is that there's a repair button. Very easy. So you have a Metro style client application, I will show you later, where a user can say reset my application state. So then, because the user will not find out where his personal settings are stored on the file system, of course. So there's a couple of considerations about the software client folder. You can leave it default. I've seen that a lot. So people are roaming profiles and they leave it default. The PKG files, well, even Acrobat Reader is already 500 kilobytes. And the app data folder is always copied completely back and forth each time you log on and log off. So that's one of the things you need to consider if you just leave it default, because if you leave it default, then you're dependent of what's happening with the application data folder in your infrastructure. Of course, you can redirect app data to your another location or the home drive of the user. And if you do that and you have kept the installation of SoftGrid client or the AppV client default, then you will just align in that configuration. So that's why they introduced a specific folder redirection option for the SoftGrid client folder. So you can have a scenario where you say, well, I just want to keep my app data roaming. I just don't want to roam the PKG files. So then you can specifically configure only the PKG files to be redirected to a network location. So one of the things that's important when you're redirecting app data or the SoftGrid client folder is that you have to make sure that they are available when you're working offline. Because if you're not working offline, a user will start the application. Depending on the configuration, some applications might not even, or none of the AppV applications will actually start, because it's hard-codedly using a path that is not available to store personal settings. So also one of the things that's an issue with PKG files in an offline scenario is that the PKG files are synced using offline files. And I have seen scenarios where people use laptops with AppV, and the users also have the ability to connect to a terminal server environment using the same set of applications. So one of the scenarios that's really an issue now is that when a user logs on to his laptop on Friday, makes some changes, logs off, that's the latest sync. So on the weekend he works offline, makes some changes again. So the latest changes are cached on the local device. On Monday he decides not to sync his laptop first. He just logs on to a terminal server via a thin client or any other desktop environment. So then you have a conflict because you've made changes in the terminal server environment in your PKG files, but they're out of sync with the local client. So using the default mechanisms within Windows, any idea what might occur then when the user turns on his laptop again? Yeah, so he will be presented in the syncing interface. What do you want to do with the userful1 sft pkg1 file? So the user will have no idea what's happening. So that's why that's a consideration. There's actually a workaround for that. I will touch on that a bit later. Oh, I will touch on that right now. So actually, there is a policy available within Windows Vista and up, where you can set the winner of that conflict. So it is hard-coded. So what we suggest typically is to configure the laptops to be the winner in a conflict, because that's more along the lines of a personal device. So if there's a conflict and one setting should win, the settings of the laptop should override the settings on the network in that scenario. So that's a blog post by Aaron Parker. So if you want more, like I mentioned before, if you really want to dive into the PKG file format, there's some tooling available from Kalasanamaki which can actually show you what's stored in the PKG files. I mean, probably some of you have also tried to look in the PKG files, but it's like a piece of garbage. It's not really nice to see what's actually being stored in there. Also, the solution for the company I work for, we have a specific approach on being independent of the PKG files. So personalization can then be managed without being dependent of the PKG files. And also the 40 kilobytes instead of the 500 kilobytes plays part in that. But it also goes for other vendors in this market space like Res and Absence. They also have nice solutions also solving this problem. So user state virtualization. User state virtualization is more a term of existing technologies. Of course, Microsoft knew at that moment they were developing UEV. So first I want to go through some of the traditional considerations around user state virtualization with the built-in mechanisms in Windows, not UEV specifically. We'll handle that at the end of the presentation. So the whole idea is, like I mentioned in the beginning, that you should also start decoupling the personalization of the user. These days we have much more dynamic requirements of the users and the business, that users, their application settings simply follow the user wherever they log on. And one of the nice things, of course, with AppV is that you get it for free. You don't have to do anything special. So what I see a lot of customers do is they use AppV. They have local profiles because of all the downsides of roaming profiles maybe, but they only redirected the software client folder to the network. The nice thing of that is because all the changes of each AppV applications are consolidated in those PKG files, you get roaming capabilities for all your personal settings for free. That's how the mechanism in AppV simply works. My opinion is you should do that for everything, because it's quite strange that the applications you virtualize, the settings roam with the user independent of terminal server, local, other devices, and so on. And the natively installed applications are not that dynamic from a personalization perspective. And this is more a sum up of the Microsoft way of doing it. So do I need this? Well, yeah. AppV is doing a good job, but again, you're not virtualizing everything. I think some of you have visited Aaron Parker's session. I left a bit early. I think his conclusion is not the primary version of Office should be virtualized. So you're still installing that locally. You're still installing some applications locally that have tight integration with the operating system. And some applications you simply cannot virtualize. There are limitations. Some applications are not virtualizable with AppV. And of course, you also have your Windows settings itself, so you also need to take care of that. Practically everything a user can change in the Windows UI settings is roamable across different devices. So whatever you decide to do, even if you decide to use a third-party solution that manages the user state, you still have to use one of these three profile types, which have been available since Windows NT 3.5. So it's still the same, with all the same limitations. Some things have been improved over the years, especially the multi-language support. So if you have a Dutch installation of Windows and you log on an English installation of Windows, you won't lose all your application data folder settings and stuff like that. So there are, of course, things improved under the hood. Mandatory profiles, we all know that's mostly used in terminal server environments, but there's always a nice discussion between local and roaming profiles. Because in the end, everyone wants roaming, but most people use local because of some of the struggles they have with that. So one of the things you can do to make it easier is the folder redirection. Well, without just blindly redirecting folders, you should really consider or think about the fact that there's two things stored in a user profile. There's a different thing. There's a lot of folders, of course, because it's mostly about files, but there's a big difference between user data and application configuration data. Those are two different things. User data is something users understand. It's the documents, his favorites, the pictures, videos, and of course his downloads these days. And these you should always redirect. That's at least my opinion, because if you don't redirect it, you don't have solid backup, or you need to put agents on the client devices. And if the hard disk crashes off the laptop or the device, you lose all the personal information of the user. So there's no issue redirecting these, and this is also why it's easy to configure within Windows these days. Oh, and if you don't redirect it and you're using roaming profiles, that's really looking for trouble. So what I've seen a lot in the past that people didn't really consider it a lot, they enabled roaming profiles without any other configuration. That means actually that all the data a user is downloading, working in documents on the desktop and stuff like that, that's copied each time a user logs on and logs off. So if you use a roaming profile and you redirect some of these user data folders, the logon times will improve a lot, because those things won't be copied back and forth each time. So that's a slight change you can make to the strategy, which improves roaming profiles if you wish to use those. And the nice thing is, if you use local profiles and you have these folders redirected, no matter on which device you log on to, those files and data are always available without roaming profiles. So there's a lot of options there. So then we have configuration data, and that's stuff the users don't understand. I mean, those are the INI files, in AppV, the PKG files, and so on. All the files that the user doesn't really directly interface with. So the nice thing of this is if you redirect application data, is that the logon speed will improve even further, because again, lots of files that don't need to be copied anymore. So if you do a good job on folder redirection, there's not a lot of things being roamed back and forth anymore. Only your registry hive as a user will be copied back and forth, and that's not that big. That's up to a couple of megabytes in there. Downside is you have to make it available offline, and yeah, it can claim a lot of disk space, but that's the case also if you don't redirect application data. It will grow anyway. It will never shrink. It will only grow bigger. So jumping into the offline files, something you need for a laptop scenario if you're redirecting folders. The user data needs to be offline as well, of course. If you're redirecting my documents to the home drive, make sure the home drive is available offline, of course. And the important thing for AppV is that AppV will not work if the redirected folder you pointed it to is not available. So none of the applications will start. So it's really crucial actually to have folder redirection working, because it's not only that they would lose personal settings, they can't use the applications. So one of the things that is really important is that as soon as you enable folder redirection on the official way, using group policies, so not hacking the registry manually in the default user profile or the mandatory profile, is that offline files will be enabled per default. So if you're doing folder redirection, but you're doing that for a large group of devices that is always connected, so it's just traditional desktops, you're also enabling offline files for that. And then you will have syncing back and forth each time, while the desktop is always connected and maybe has a 1 gigabit connection. So if that is the case, I would set an overruling group policy for that OU where those devices are in, making sure that synchronization or offline files is not used for those devices. So this is actually a nice feature which I learned from a customer a couple of years ago. I was not aware, because in some organizations it's quite important that the personal certificates and the stored passwords are stored for the users. Especially if you have some external application you connect to as an organization, the certificate is available in the user profile, and that needs to be there each time. Otherwise, the user cannot actually use the web application. And the same goes if he logs on and he clicks the save password setting. The nice thing is there's a feature in Windows. It's called, I think I wrote it down wrong because then more people would know. It's called credential roaming, actually, the feature itself in group policy. It's a computer configuration group policy, which enables the mechanism that the personal passwords or the stored passwords and the personal certificates are actually not stored in the profile anymore, but they're stored as a user property in the Active Directory, making you completely independent of any type of user profile. And you have full roaming capabilities. So if you have a local profile, you log on. For the first time, you need to install the personal certificate to get a connection to the website, or you save a network password or a web form password. And those settings will be directly stored in the AD for the user. So if you delete the local profile or you log off and you go to another machine, a new profile gets created because you're using local profiles. The personal certificates and the stored passwords will actually be there directly. So that's a roaming capability without actually using roaming profiles. So that's really a nice feature that's in there. Well, let me skip this one. I think I used to preach on this for years, that stop using scripts, use group policy, user preferences to get the same experience for natively installed applications as for AppV. Because most people, I still realize, I didn't see a lot of hands go up yesterday in Nika Kalla's session, but most people, in my opinion, still use the management server to deliver the shortcuts and file type associations with AppV. So the nice thing is you can also do this for natively installed applications using group policy user preferences. So what are the limitations of the traditional user state virtualization mechanisms available in Windows? And actually a couple of these will be resolved with a new UEV solution that Microsoft is coming out as well. The first one, there's no cross-platform support. So that's really, even with Windows 7 and Windows 2008 R2 running in the same organization, might still not be a good idea to use roaming profiles between those two different operating systems. Folder redirection is okay. Roaming profiles could be hard. So there's no segmentation on personalization. So if I make a change in a locally installed application, no personal settings will be stored segmented per application. It will be stored in the big blob we call a user profile. Except the AppV application, of course, because there you can provide support on a per application level. So there's no clean-up mechanisms. We all know that the most systems management solutions can actually even do a wake on LAN boot in the middle of the night, deinstall applications of the desktops, and then the application settings are still stored in a user profile. There's no cleaning up mechanism available in Windows for that. So, any questions about traditional user profiles, AppV 4.6 so far? It's a lot, yeah.
Have you, do you, like, a second ago you mentioned, well, a little while ago now, you mentioned Adobe and the ever-growing PKG part. How would you say people deal with it? Because it's going to be a while before we go on to 4.6.
Yeah. So one of the things which is quite advanced, and I'm actually not even an expert in that, that's more up to Nicker, but I think he needed to take his plane to Sweden at 4, so he's not here. But within the sequencer, if you, the hard part is finding out which files are causing the problem. That's the hard part. So the best thing for that is the tool of Kalasanamaki. Then at least you can find which file is in there, which shouldn't be in there. Within the sequencer, you actually have a configuration option if something is application configuration or user configuration. And that actually has impact if it comes in the user state PKG file or not. So there is influence on it. The hard part is figuring out which file is causing or files are causing the issue. So now you know probably why those two buttons exist in the sequencer, because it's not really documented quite well. So. Any other questions about 4.6? Excited about 5? You don't know yet, right? Okay. So everything I'm showing you from this point, or talk about from this point, is a beta version. So changes can be made, of course. Personally, I don't expect big changes, maybe some additions in functionality from what we have now. I'm not really happy with the fact that you can only use PowerShell to convert applications, but might be nice if the sequencer could do that. And some of the things, let me put it this way, I've installed AppV5 for numerous times now. The MVPs had access to the CTP builds of it. And only about a month ago, I started thinking about, well, I've been doing the new install and testing all the components now for a while, but let me think about what the impact is for existing scenarios. And that's basically what I'm going to touch upon, because most of you that are here are probably using AppV4. So for new customers that don't have AppV, it will be a blast, because they don't have a lot of the downsides we all struggled with the last couple of years as we sit here. The big issue will be for the larger implementations that are done. So it's not really to demotivate you, it's just to prepare you, because some things you might want to prepare long ahead of time. So that's what I'm going to go into right now. So the management server still exists. I think last year, at the end of last year, we had the first European AppV user group, and this was the most asked question. Will the management server still be there, or do we need to use the SCCM, or do we need to have SCCM to get some sort of management? Well, that will not be the case. So there will be a management server. The streaming server, which is a separate component you could use, so that's not the management server where you refresh to, it is a separate install. I think it's called the lightweight streaming server. That's gone. You don't need that anymore. The reason why it's gone is because there is no real-time streaming protocol anymore. So the whole RTSP part is gone. Everything is basic SMB traffic or HTTP, secured or unsecured. So if you have a complicated network infrastructure and you need to configure ports for the streaming, make sure that HTTP, whatever port you are using, because you need to use a different set of ports for the new AppV management server, make sure those are open, because it's not RTSP anymore. So there's no MMC snap-in anymore. So I think it's slow, so that's the good thing maybe that it's gone. The strange thing is it will be Silverlight. So I will show you the interface in a minute. Yeah. So probably they started with the management server a long while ago, because in my belief Silverlight is sort of dead. I mean, I don't think Silverlight will run on Metro apps and stuff like that, so I don't see the point, but we're gonna learn to live with that. The nice thing is that there's a lot of PowerShell. Also on the server side. So you've seen Aaron Parker do a demo maybe with migrating some packages and PowerShelling the AppV client. Also the management server is completely manageable through PowerShell. If you don't like Silverlight, everything you can do in the management interface, plus even a little bit more, can be done with PowerShell. So in the very worst case scenario, you can build your own UI using PowerShell, make it better. But that's a nice thing, especially automating the whole environment, of course, if you're doing that. So that's, well, the last bullet is the most important one. The management server is not an upgrade. So everything you have configured now in your AppV4 management server, you have to do again. User groups, file type associations if you've done that manually and not in the AppV sequence. So that's a consideration. So it will be a side-by-side scenario, or a real big bang that you do, you know, the one weekend where you just replace everything. I don't think so. You will be running them side by side. You can do it on the same server. It requires some more extensive configuration on the IP port usage, but it can be done on the same machine. So dynamic suite composition, who's using it? I'm using it to hurt myself, so, but okay. So one of the things why it's not being used a lot is not because it doesn't always work. It's simply very hard to manage, because you manage it after you're done sequencing, and then you have to couple the one application through the OSD to the other one, and there's no overview what's connected to each other. So that's really one of the reasons why a lot of people don't use dynamic suiting. So the nice thing is that the dynamic suiting, which is now called connection groups in AppV5, is not configured within the application configuration anymore. So that's really a nice thing. So you do it from the outside, and there's actually a couple of locations where you can manage it. So that really depends on the way you want to deploy your AppV infrastructure in the future. So you can do it on the management server with the new web or Silverlight console. So you can simply create a connection group. You call it application A to B or something like that. And then you just select application A and B, which you already imported into your management server. And you're done. So you can also change it afterwards. And you can even have connection groups with security groups on that. Meaning that if the one user population will only need the one application, and the other user population those need the connection group configuration, you can put a security group filter on the connection group level. So that there's much more configuration options, so it makes more sense to really start using it in the future. So you can also do it on the management server using the PowerShell commandlets, of course, but the nice thing is you can also do it on the client side. So some people are using like scripting now or using the MSI now without the management server to deploy applications to the clients. But even then, you can use PowerShell scripts to dynamically suite or connection group the applications to each other. So there's a lot of configuration options out there. It has a plus side, it has a downside. What of the options am I going to use? So start playing around with that. Okay, so again, also, all your dynamic suite configuration settings you will lose once you upgrade your appv4.6 packages. So that's also something you need to consider. So try to, from now on, keep track on what the relationships are between applications. And then from that moment on, it's pretty easy to do that in the management console.
Is there a problem if you have captured your 4.6 applications not by using the cube drive, but installing it at a default location instead?
Depends on the application level, but no, because even if you, so the question is there an issue if during sequencing time I did not install the queue, but I just installed two C program files or the default location? Well, again, not 100% guarantee, of course, but if you install something to C program files using appv4, you still need to specify an empty queue asset folder. So there will not be an issue because the virtual file system redirection will simply be picked up by the appv5 conversion mechanism. Yep. So the sequencer, well, the sequencer interface is pretty much the same. There's only one thing that is really irritating. I think Nick touched on that yesterday. You need to specify the folder you're going to install to before you started the installer of the application. So I already had a couple of times like, I don't even know where Acrobat Reader the exact folder that's going to. So that's really strange. We hope that that's some of the feedback from us that they will use to change that in the future, but we're not sure. So the output is completely different. So there's no more SFT file, OSD file, icon files. There is an XML, but it's not a manifest XML the way we've seen it since appv 4.5. Everything is encapsulated into one big file. It's called an appv file. It actually also outputs some additional XML files, and already got some questions about that. What are those for? Well, they're not used. Those are actually the configuration elements that are inside the appv file. The nice thing is that the sequencer creates an extract of that outside of the virtual application. And if you want to change settings in the virtual application, you don't have to go into the appv file. You can just import the appv file into the management console, and then additionally import the overruling configuration, which you've manually manipulated. And that's what you do, for instance, with the scripting elements we do now a lot in the OSD files. You can do that from those XML files that sit besides the appv file. So you need to upgrade your appv4 sequences. So a couple of weeks ago, I was just playing around and I forgot my hard disk, my mobile hard disk. I was in the office and I needed to have some sequences. And I just searched SFT on my local hard disk and I found SoftGrid 2.0 packages. The nice thing is, these still work in 4.6 without even migrating. You don't have all the functionality because we don't have the manifest file done then, and we also don't have the optimized streaming in the SFT file format, but they simply work. That's not the case anymore when you go to appv5. So you cannot use the appv5 client to use 4.6 created sequences. You have to really touch them one by one to make sure they work on the new appv5 client. So that's an important aspect. My biggest disappointment, you can't use the sequencer to upgrade the appv4 packages. You have to use the PowerShell commandlets. Well, that's, I mean, I think Aaron Parker is the one of us that spent the most time of that. So all the PowerShell commands you need for that are available on his website. So check those out and start playing around with it. Because I think this is the most important aspect of migrating to AppV 5 in the future. Because, and this has to do with the specific Q drive fact mostly. So the sequencer scripts that you can use to migrate the applications, they have a testing mechanism to see if the application is compatible for migration to AppV5 format. But that will never be a 100% score. So there will be cases, I'm pretty sure, that the test will say it's compatible, you migrate it, and it won't work. So this is a real important aspect because, I mean, putting out the AppV infrastructure and even making some changes to that after you're in production, that's easy. That's just making central one-time changes. So all the work we all do, most of the time, goes into the sequencing of the applications. So don't think, well, AppV5 is coming out maybe in September, maybe we need functionality. We just plan a week to migrate the applications, because that's not going to be the case probably. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. So one of the things that we actually had an argument about that with the product team. One of the things that I mentioned from the beginning is like, well, so they explained they are doing some things in the virtual environment when they're migrating an application to the AppV5 format. But that's mostly in the registry where you see the SFT mount points now in the registry. So they just replace that with the new location on disk for the migrated application. But one of the things that they're not touching is that if the content of a configuration file in your sequence is pointing to Q, they're not going to do anything with that. So I think those packages will fail directly because then they're pointing to something that doesn't exist anymore. Even worse, the application is not there, it's in a different location now. So that's exactly the point why I'm saying start doing this already. It may seem like really early because we have no idea about the release date, but maybe you have a high percentage of applications that won't be convertible out of the box. Maybe there's a larger percentage that we wish you need to resequence. So that's why I'm saying if there's something you need to play around with from this moment, it's with converting packages, depending on how many applications you have, of course.
The PowerShell commands for testing the for upgrading the packages.
Mm-hmm.
Do they test the contents of that configuration files with hard-coded files?
No. In the obvious locations, so registry, yes. INI files or even more custom configuration files, no. So yeah, that. Yeah. So the hardest thing for me, I have to keep it slow. It's being recorded. So the hardest thing for me is we mentioned this. Like, I can name like 50 applications that I've done that I've pointed to Q during installation and it's saved in the configuration file. And then Microsoft came with, well, do you have really specific real-life scenario examples? And we were like, everyone that sequences know that they have applications with hard-coded Q references to it. So I actually came up with a trick which might help testing without actually migrating the application, and that's just testing each application while you do an installation of the SoftGrid 4.6 client and not use the Q drive, but another drive. Yeah, so you put it to the R drive, and you launch all the applications that you have, and all of them that don't work, probably will have a migration issue. I think that's a nice test to play around with. I mean, I don't have as many applications as you have. I'm always playing around with the basic applications, and those are migratable easily, of course, but it's really the business-specific applications that you use that might cause the issues. So, yeah, go ahead.
What happens with stringing protocol? Because version 5 has less protocols.
Which streaming protocol?
Well, version 5 only use HTTP and
Yeah.
SMB.
Mm-hmm. You mean the locations in the OSD file
Yeah.
that you point to?
Yeah.
They're not even used anymore. There's no, that's a good question. So in the OSD files now we always have to think what's the location going to be, or use the softgrid server variable, and then you make sure on the client. That's completely gone. You just do that on the client, you point it to a server, and that's it. It's really easy on that level. Yeah. So another thing in the OSD files, what you lose during migration are the script elements. So, well, every exotic application that didn't work out of the box with the sequencer, I think a large percentage of those, you use some sort of script to put things in place to get them working. Those will not be migrated as well. So the work you've done in those scripts is not lost, but you have to think of it like, okay, I'm migrating the package, the scripts will not be migrated. I have script possibilities in the appv5 new XML format, so you just have to make sure that you run those scripts from the new XML file. Yeah, so it is possible, but keep it in mind. So the management server. So the management server actually consists of, well, there's two server roles, and they don't have to be installed on the same server. We still need a SQL database for the configuration. You have a management server, and then you have refresh servers. And you can have multiple refresh servers, and they use different ports. So the management server is using port 8080 in my setup, and my refresh server is using port 8081, I think, but that's completely configurable. And the client is not talking to the management server. The client is talking to the refresh server. So did anyone already played with the appv5 bits? Okay. So one of the things that's a little bit irritating is that as soon as you add a new package or you make a change in the management server, it will take at least 10 minutes before the client will get the change. So we are used to putting a package in the management server, just hit refresh and you're done. That's not the case. So don't think it doesn't work. They just have a refresh interval now. So probably one of the System Center guys helped the appv management server team. So one of the other MVPs from Germany, Volker Grafe, he actually has a blog post how you, for test purposes, can put this down to 30 seconds or so. So especially when you're testing and playing around with appv5, put that down, because otherwise you can hit refresh, but it will refresh only after 10 minutes. So, and that's a change you need to make on the publishing server. So I'm calling it refresh server, it's actually called the publishing server. Yeah.
What's that latency due to? Why is there that latency?
No idea. Yeah, we believe, we didn't get a correct answer yet, but we believe that because the management server is doing this, the publishing server is keeping all the configuration in memory, and they don't want to continuously pump up the memory. So because the publishing server is actually not using the SQL database. So you have like, it's really like SCCM now. You have like component 1, 2, 3, 4 talking to each other. So that's why they chose for a high interval. So we have no idea what on this level might change, but due to the architecture, there must be a reason why it's already on 10 minutes. So yeah.
It's to make config managers look good now in provisioning.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is actually really the same thing. The architecture they're using, if you know about SCCM, you can think of the management server as being like the site server.
Yeah.
Configure talk to database. These publishing servers are going to be the equivalent of distribution points. And so now you're talking about a unit that's out of a remote site that's polling for all of the package information that anyone might possibly need. And if you're doing that on a frequent basis, that's going to be a lot of traffic.
Yeah.
Refresh
Well,
server does a policy refresh against the management server.
yep. Well, that's a good one, Tim. Thanks. So the console, I'm not going to import packages. I just imported a couple already. Oh, okay. So the beamer switched down the resolution, so it's really bad. Oh my god. Oh, okay. At least this is. So I should not have clicked that, I guess. Okay, so I've killed. Okay, I haven't seen this issue yet, but this has to do with Silverlight, so it doesn't go down. And probably stores, okay, it doesn't save your changes. Okay, so on the packages node here, you add an appv file. So the output of a sequence, let's do that first because that makes more sense. Sorry about that. Oh. So you sequence an application. I'm not going to show you the sequencer because only the output is different, the rest is just the same. So the sequencer is, it's good that it didn't change that much because that's the part we interface the most with. The output will be like this, so it's pretty nice. You have the appv file, which is the actual virtual application. You have a MSI file. So if you double click this on a client or you put it in deployment system other than System Center also, it will simply deploy the package, load it 100% in cache, publish shortcuts, and you're ready to go. So you need no backend then. It's really easy. So for testing as well, you just install the appv client, you double click the MSI, and you can already test the application. So it's a good thing. Then you have the configuration files. It's going to take too much time on the differences. I think one of the things I really like is that you now have a new trigger when to run your own scripts or executables in the virtual environment. And that is when a virtual environment opens and closes instead of when you launch an application. So when you have an application suite with multiple virtual applications running, in the past we needed to modify and run the script from each OSD file because you don't know which application will be started by the user the first time. So now you can just, on a virtual application level, have scripts running. So you don't configure anything anymore on the application level, just when the first application that opens this virtual environment and then codes get executed. So that's a real nice thing. Those are done through those two XML files. Those XML files are not used per default. So it's not like an OSD file. Everything is remarked out as well. So this is just a template of what's in the virtual application. If you want to make a modification, add a script for instance, you have to do it in the XML part. There are, I think there are empty examples in there somewhere. So these are the file type associations and so on. So XML, PowerShell, all the new things you really need to pick up. I'm not going to go in there, but you enable that in here. As soon as you've imported the appv package and you have custom configuration in the XML file, you have to import that XML file as well. Otherwise, that configuration will not be applied. So if you're making changes here and you're like, why doesn't the script run? It's because you need to import the XML file. So one of the things, and Microsoft has emphasized to us that we are, if we show this, we should say, and this is not supported by Microsoft, but you can just rename the appv file to a zip file now. So the SFT file is gone, but it's also a more open format. So if you want to know what's in the sequence, you can just hive this in the registry or use other tools that can read registry. This is the virtual registry that was created at sequencing time. And you can just see what files are installed here. But it's not supported to manipulate anything using the zip interface. Yep?
Is that not supported or not possible?
I think it's not possible. I haven't tried manipulating the changes. Anyone else tried that? Yeah, yeah. Who might that be? Yeah, okay.
By the way, the column opens the dot file with edit to make changes.
No, but he Nick Akalla reverse engineered the SFT file format so that he can make changes without breaking the format. So if you reverse engineer the upv format, the new format, then you theoretically you could make a change to the .apv file without breaking it, but using zip will break it. So yeah, so there. I think Nick is not here because he's doing the bit by bit piece. So I'm not going to add, but it's quite simple. You need a share or a HTTP pod, and that can be any server. It does. So you have the management server and the publishing server. The management server is only used by the management console. The publishing server is used by the clients to do the refresh, but the streams don't have to come from neither of these two servers. They can just be any HTTP server. Yeah? Doesn't need to make sense, but you can do whatever you want. UNC, HTTP. You import them here, and they will never be enabled per default. So they will always be in the unpublished state like this, because you need to modify some changes before you can use it. So that's mainly about giving access. So you can just, well, you cannot browse. You need to type the name of an ID group or user, and then you can check it, and it will be added. You can imagine how we responded the first time they showed us the interface, right? Or, okay. So you can edit some additional configuration elements, like the shortcut, file type associations. The nice thing is, if you make changes through this interface, you can export this configuration that you've made. So you can store them if you want. And this is how you import the, oh, I'm doing this wrong. I guess it's not available yet then. It's grayed out, so I cannot import a customized XML file just yet. So as soon as you publish it, it will be picked up by the publishing server refresh, interval of 10 minutes, and then the clients will be able to access the application, start streaming it, and so on. Okay. Oh, I'm forgetting an important part. So let's pretend that my WinRAR application and my CD burner application, I've sequenced them separately, and I want them to interact with each other like we could with dynamic suite composition. So I don't need to configure anything in the packages itself. I just imported them plainly into the management console. And in the app connection groups, you can create groups and select applications that belong to that group. So if I would create a connection group here, CD burner with WinRAR, for instance. I just select it. Again, everything you create per default will be unpublished, so you really have your time to create a configuration. And here you can simply see a list of applications. I hope this works in the low resolution. Well, okay. I have something else to complain about. You can decide to add a security filter to this connection group, meaning that if you're not a member of that group, the connection group configuration will simply not apply to you. But you are able to use WinRAR and Nero if you have access to those applications directly. So there's a little bit of configuration, but there is much more options that are usable now. So when you're done, you just publish the connection group. And the nice thing is the applications can be running or configured in multiple connection groups. It doesn't have to be one. You can just reuse applications in different connection groups. So the thing that's really missing is, of course, an interface, but that's a discussion I've had many times. How would you really represent this like in a Visio style kind of interface? Because you can lose your oversight of what is connected to other applications. So that's the new style of dynamic suiting. So the client, think most of you have seen that in previous sessions. So you can configure it quite well during installation. MSI properties are available for unattended installation. You can change configuration using PowerShell. And there's also a ADM template delivered for the client. If you're looking for it, I was looking for it because I don't always read the documentation they ship with it. The ADM templates for the client are installed when you install the sequencer. So that's where you can find the ADM templates for the client. The UI is Metro style. Yeah, thanks. But there's not a lot of things to do for the user there, except refresh and reset the personal settings. So this has been touched on quite a lot already. So the first time a lot of AppV people see AppV5, they're like, I see everything on disk. I see the registry in the real world somewhere. I see the files that the personal changes the users make in app data. I can find those files on disk. Is it still virtualized? It's still virtualized. It's just less isolated. And the whole reason for the less isolation is to have better integration points with the local OS. I think the largest portion of applications that you now decide not to virtualize have to do with the fact that it's not smart to virtualize them, simply because they interact with the OS very tightly. And that's why they have less isolated solution for AppV5 now. So the cache file is gone, the Q drive is gone, so there's not another drive. It's not like it's R now, but it's really gone. The files, as soon as you launch an application, the files are actually stored on the local disk. You can really see the complete installation folder structure. It's just not in C program files or wherever you sequenced it to. It's per default, it's in the program data folder. It's like the new style for all users. And there you will see the package GUID, and in the package GUID you will see, this is WinRAR, I believe, the complete folder structure that's on disk. So if you simply look at a shortcut now that has been published by the management server or the publishing server, and you look at the properties, you simply see this folder location. It's nothing SFT trace and launch and the name. It's just pointing to the actual executable. Yeah. So this is an important one. AppV5 does not upgrade. This is why you can actually run the 4.6 client and the 5.0 client on the same system and run 5.0 application and 4.6 application. So there is no upgrade at all. So either you do a big bang upgrade, which probably no one will do because the longest time will be spent on migrating the application. So the side-by-side scenario is the most obvious one. The side-by-side scenario, there are some things they can consider if the application is still published on two platforms, because then you have an issue with the shortcut delivery and the file type associations. So if I have Acrobat Reader on 4.6 and 5.0, if you enable the coexistence scenario, which is a 5.0 client configuration, as soon as the application is published in two versions, the 5.0 will always win. So that's what they call the coexistence scenario. Yeah, so this could be a useful configuration. Yep. Okay, so an important one, because this is a big change. The PKG files are gone, but personalization, of course, still is stored on the local OS. But it's on the local disk. So if you look in the registry, and you don't have to like run the registry editor anymore in the virtual environment, you can just look in current user, software, Microsoft, AppV, and then you will get packages, GUID of the application, and then it will start over again, current user, software, WinRAR. Just the same location as you would expect it to be natively. So if the application is using the registry, it's still using HKCU software WinRAR, of course. That's what redirection is called. Yeah? The same goes for application data. So also that doesn't go into a proprietary format anymore. It will just go into a deeper folder structure, which is actually also under app data. So typically, this application I'm showing you now would go to roaming app data can never be limited. That's the applications folder. And now it's going to roaming app data, Microsoft AppV client, virtual file system, package GUID, app data, and then there. So it's very easy now to see what's happening. You don't, so the PKG files and the mystery that happens in there is completely gone in the next release. So that's really a nice change, actually. So this is just a folder structure I can now browse through. And in the registry, I can simply now see the personal settings. So quite decent to troubleshoot applications as well. Okay. So this is the hard part. In the beginning, I've told you that we've seen a lot of customers redirecting software client folder, and you have roaming capabilities. But if you think about how the new format is storing its files, it's less dynamic now, because the registry, personal changes, are just stored in your real registry. So all of a sudden, you have to think about how am I going to roam the personalization of AppV5? Because it's in your registry. So you need to think about roaming profiles again, all over. Yeah, so that's quite a, depending on the scenario, that can be quite a big impact. What really is not good is, since there is no real upgrade on the client, it's just a new solution you install. It's AppV5. So all the personal settings that your users have for AppV 4.6, they've made, the changes they've made, those will be lost when you upgrade. Yeah, so that's why it might be useful to look at Microsoft UEV or third-party solutions that simply manage the application seamlessly from a personalization perspective. Okay. Who's heard about UEV or read about it, knows a bit what it does? Okay. Well, it's available with the release of AppV5, so you can play around with it. When it goes live, it will be a part of MDOP, so it will only, that's how it's now. It will only be available as part of software assurance, like we get AppV for desktop, so that's the same story there. It will not go lower than Windows 6, so no Windows XP support or 2003, only Windows 7 and 8. The nice thing is it's really like for native applications, the personalization now is managed the same as for AppV. It's on demand. So when I have locally installed Microsoft Office, which we all probably do, then the personalization is handled on the fly. So when I close the application, settings are stored on the network for me directly. So you have the same feeling of dynamics as with AppV we have now. And the nice thing is it will also seamlessly roam personal settings between AppV and natively installed. So also completely seamless. I make a change in an AppV Acrobat reader, I go to another machine, Acrobat reader is installed there, I just get my changes there, back and forth. So that's a nice thing as well. Well, and of course the AppV5 migration, there it could really help, because if you now have AppV 4.6, and in your future migration scenario, you first implement Microsoft UEV, the changes will automatically be captured and the PKG files don't matter anymore from that moment. So when you move to AppV5 then, the personal settings of your AppV4 applications are still there. Yeah, so that's, so hopefully they will release it at least at the same time, but that's completely unclear.